They originally started.
Yeah. I'm not sure what you did. I was an American student and like escaped the country, active, and they came back. Yeah. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Hi, how are we doing? Great, wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for joining us for a celebration of literature and living writers. My name is Megan Marshall. I'm the director of the Hugh C. Hyde Living Writers series. And this is officially the kickoff event of the semester. And I'm so happy that it features one of our SDSU family, a graduate of the MFA program in creative writing. And yes, that's right. To add an additional layer of awesomeness to that, our featured author actually did a lot of the research for her debut novel, from which she's going to be sharing tonight, right here in Love Library with the help of Special Collections. So it's, it's sort of like a wonderful full circle homecoming event. Before I introduce her officially, I do want to thank those who have helped to make this event and this series possible, including all of our friends here at Love Library. I have Markle Tumlin holding it down in the back, my fabulous co-host. And also I want to thank Donnie Muka Hall, Laurel Bliss, and Rebecca Williamson. Also need to thank the Department of English and Comparative Literature for their continued support of this series, as well as Michael Ramirez and the representatives from Aztec Shops who are working over there in the corner selling books. And lastly, I am humbled to acknowledge the space that we are privileged to share this evening. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations. And as members of the SDSU community, we acknowledge and celebrate this legacy. Just a few final reminders. Oh, yeah, see, thank you. That was prompted me. I'm on the right schedule here. A few final reminders. If you have yet to do so, please silence your cell phones. And also know that the event is being recorded, but don't worry, all we see is this. So unfortunately, we're not going to make anyone else YouTube stars tonight. All right, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our featured reader. Marta Balcewicz spent her early childhood in Pomerania and Madrid, and now lives in Toronto. She is the author of Big Shadow, released last year from Book Hub Press, and as I mentioned, from which she'll be sharing tonight. Her work has also appeared in Catapult, Tin House Online, Washington Square Review, The Rumpus, and Passages North, amongst other publications, and has been anthologized in Tiny Crimes, which came out from Catapult in 2018. She is a graduate of SDSU's MFA program in creative writing, as well as the recipient of a fellowship from Tin House Workshops. Currently, she is at work on her second novel. Marta's debut, Big Shadow, has been lauded as radiating warmth and coldness and color and light, brimming with intelligence and wit, and a smart, ironic, and tender with prose as sharp as a scam. But what I believe makes her work so compelling and essential is her unique ability to interrogate power dynamics, grooming, and exploitation in the art and literary world, and underscore the purpose of the Me Too movement to identify perpetrators and support survivors. We see these dynamics unfold through the journey of our teen protagonist, Judy, a self-described hopeful idiot who, like many young people, is searching for a sense of identity and purpose. What she finds instead are forces that have the power to bulldoze over her, entities and circumstances that linger like big, oppressive shadows. With evocative, vivid, and well-researched prose, Marta presents Judy's plight against the backdrop of late 1990s grunge angst, which I very much identify with, and mid-1970s punk nihilism. It's an intriguing cocktail that implodes in an unexpectedly soft, yet deeply affecting way, a novel that stays with you long after its final page. So we are very excited to welcome back to her old stomping grounds, Marta Balcewicz. Hello.
Yeah. So I was a student here, as Megan
mentioned, and they used to come to these events. And my favorite guest that I saw at Living Writers was the poet Ellen Bass. And I liked her because she used a metaphor that I really enjoyed and I've thought about since. And the metaphor was a bay leaf. And she said that when she's done composing a poem, she sometimes finds that it had a bay leaf inside of it. And she pulls it out and throws it out in the trash. And it's no longer part of the poem, but it was something that was essential in the composition. So just in case not everyone knows what a bay leaf is. just in case, right? It's just a leaf that looks like any other leaf from a tree or a shrub, and you put it in your soup or sauce, and you hope the flavor seeps out of it like any other herb or spice. But you do remove it after because it's inedible. It's kind of rough and hard, and it wouldn't be something you want to serve to someone or eat yourself. So yeah, so it's something you remove, and this essence remains from this formerly physical ingredient. So so as you can probably figure out, for Ellen Bass, this could have been like a theme she needed in there while it was still cooking, or a line or a word or a rhyme or another formal element of a poem, but then it's no longer needed at the end and only its flavor remains. So I like that a lot. And I'm sure a lot of us here have been exposed to a ton of different metaphors related to craft, because there's so many, like scaffolding, right, that gets taken away by the builders once the structure is done. And I don't like this one, but darlings that we're supposed to kill. So I wanted to mention too that I don't know if you've read Peter Hote Davies's craft book, The Art of Revision, from 2 years ago. I haven't read it, but I've read reviews. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think he has interesting ideas about darlings. Again, he might not, I might be projecting. But I think he said that we should question the approach of the advice of just killing them off, and sort of respect the past self that must have felt compelled to stick them in there, and wonder why our past self did that, and see maybe the use of them and kind of question their necessity a bit more. So yeah, I like that too. But yeah, he had another metaphor like the bay leaf. I'm gonna read just the opening paragraph of my novel. Let's start. For a while, I had a job where I'd watch the passing clouds. In a notebook that I always carried with me, I'd write, "That one went on its way. There was nothing unusual about that one." I learned how the clouds set themselves apart by becoming shapes that had nothing to do with one another. Wedding veils, curdled milk, trails of horse droppings perfectly spaced out. I learned their proper names: Cirrus, Stratus, Nimbus. The clouds in the opening credits of The Simpsons are stratocumulus, for example. Nephology is the study of clouds, and nephrology is the study of kidneys. I could tell you so much more. I was hyper aware and educated. I walked around always tense and looked upward a lot, so that at the end of the day, I'd feel an ache in my neck and in my shoulders. I applied to the MFA here with the first 10 chapters of my novel written, but they sounded very different from what the first 10 chapters sound like now. I'd been tinkering with them for probably a decade by that point, often rewriting them over and over again. The professors that I met here were very encouraging and provided a type of encouragement that was clearly necessary. Professor Alcocer is not here, but she wanted to be here, she said, but she's not here. But she was wonderful, and as was, well, two people who are also not here because they no longer teach here, Ilya Kaminsky and Katie Ferris. But Katie Ferris will be a guest, Living Writers, later this semester. And then my classmates were also very nice, said very nice things to me, which was what helped me finish my manuscript. And once I was here, I very quickly wrote the remaining 30 chapters. I wrote them in 1 month, actually, during a summer month. And then the long process of revision began. And as Megan mentioned, I also did research here as the independent study project you can do with the special collections librarian, Culbertson, and I researched the alternative religions materials in the special collections, which are very interesting. And I researched those for the cult elements in the novel. So returning to the idea of things like the bay leaf that are at one point present and are removed, I wanted to read some sections of the novel that contain elements that have shrunk and that were at one point a lot bigger. But through the revision process, which took about 5 years, I mentioned they were removed or lessened. So the first part I'll read, I'll mention that my novel's protagonist is a narrator, is a young woman named Judy, who's unhappy with her present set of circumstances, and specifically her two closest friends and the mother, her mother, her home life, her mom. In earlier drafts, I had devoted quite a lot of space and attention and words to Judy's first boyfriend, who's named Jeremy. And he had a backstory. There are details about their first dates and their conflicts and these types of first date, first boyfriend type details. But in the current version, Jeremy is but a shadow of his former self. He's really just appears a few times and it is not a big presence at all. Yet I think it still suffices to show him and use him as an example of a disappointment in her life. So I'm going to read the scene in which she meets him, which is the first time we hear about him. In this scene, she's just walking down the street in her city. So yeah, she's walking. Soon I passed by the marquee of the repertory cinema where Jeremy, my first boyfriend, had worked. On page 33, if you like reading along. His title, as I remember it, was Assistant Junior Theater Co-Manager. Passing by the cinema wasn't good for me these days. Jeremy and I had met in the final week of winter when I'd gone to see the film Jane B for Agnes B, part of a French documentary showcase with Alex and Christopher, of course. Alex and Christopher are her two friends that she doesn't like. After slipping out to go to the bathroom, I returned to the theater and was faced with a horrifying flat dark that could only be described as what you'd see if accidentally buried alive. After my eyes adjusted somewhat, I saw that each row in the theater had a complete set of heads. Everyone the same height, the same hairstyle, no one wearing a hat, no seat appearing vacant. The then scene in the documentary was particularly low lit too. I believe Jane Birkin might have been in a cemetery even, or it was nighttime and she was sitting alone in her apartment in Paris. Either way, I panicked. I didn't bother attempting to figure out which row it was I'd come out of. Instead, I fled to the lobby, where I pretended to be immersed in the mechanics of the vintage popcorn machine until Jeremy walked by, asked if everything was cool, and offered me a free pass to the next day's screening of News from Home to make up for all of my troubles. I went to see News on my own. By the time Alex and Christopher discovered I was going, the tickets were sold out. I told them I'd found the pass on the floor inside the women's bathroom. After the screening, Jeremy and I talked film theory, strategies of distanciation, also will to allegory a little. He showed me the theater manager's storage closet, from which he encouraged me to pick out a film poster to take home for free. I grabbed the closest tube. I figured anything in that closet was bound to be good. When I said this to Jeremy, he gave me a long and happy look. That's an unusually positive approach, he said, which seemed the complete opposite of how I'd ever thought of my approaches. Wait, there's Jeremy. Another thing I devoted a lot more room to in earlier drafts was the narrator's mom, who's still very present. But I had given her a lot more of a backstory. So if you read it, you'll know she's quite an archetypal, anxious mother type. And because she's an archetype, it's provided a cheat sheet of sorts, and that I could just rely on her common knowledge of this type of person and focus instead on her finer details to round her out. So I had originally included this backstory to sort of explain her anxiety, which was this kind of tragic story of a lost younger sibling and this terrible event from her childhood. But I removed that, it's all gone. And she's an anxious woman. And I think it's a pathology that hopefully we all still get without this backstory of a terrible, trauma of a lost sibling. I'm gonna read a part with the mom, with the anxious mom. It's on page 74 at the bottom. Sometime in the early evening, with the apartment still empty of my mother, I heard a woman scream a silly sounding word beneath my open living room window. She repeated it over and over in a painful wail, as if she were losing her mind. By the time I looked out, a number of other faces were pressed to their window screens, and a couple of people had stopped on the street to watch the woman break down. The woman was a neighbor in the throes of despair, calling her dog's name because, as I gathered, the dog had sprinted away down the middle of the street, disappearing over the horizon. When my mother came home, she immediately started talking about the dog. She transposed whatever pain the dog owner was experiencing into something that was legible for her own unique and personal mania. She told me that when she first spotted the small crowd near the front of her house, and then remembered that on the way, she'd passed people who looked like they were on a search mission, with their heads turning side to side, getting down on their knees to peek underneath parked cars. She believed something had happened to me, not a dog, but her daughter. There was no saying how she would explain why the search party was calling out the absurd word that was the dog's name, Taffy, or how she'd believe I could fit in the narrow, flat space of a car's underside. I didn't question it. I didn't need to know. But I didn't need to hear. But I knew it was true because as I'd lain on the couch, I'd heard her through the half-open window with a wail as raw as that of the woman whose dog had disappeared. My mother had challenged anyone in our neighborhood who dared be more deranged than she was. Did something happen to my daughter? She yelled at the sidewalks and its people. Did something happen to my daughter? So as Megan mentioned, my novel is in large part focused on the relationship between the narrator and a man named Maurice, who's a poetry professor and a former musician from New York City's mid-70s scene. Maurice was originally meant to be just one of the many distractions that pull her away from her current situation. Something that only partially lures her away. But over time, he grew and took up more of the plot and space in the book, and more of the narrator's attention and her time. So in this sense, he was the opposite of a bay leaf, or of a darling that needs to be killed off. In the final version, he's very much a central force and a central force of a gravitational pull for my narrator. And if I had to think of a metaphor for Maurice, it would be that of an expandable water toy, which are also known as grow monsters. And I'll read from the Wikipedia description. These things. Expandable water toys, or grow monsters, are novelty items made from a super absorbent polymer. They're toys that expand after being put into water for anything between a few hours to several days. The polymers can absorb and retain extremely large amounts of liquid relative to their mass. They come in many different sizes and shapes. Reptiles and dinosaurs are common figures, but there are many others, such as sharks, squid, seahorses, lobster, insects, and humans. So I'm now going to read a part with Maurice. In this scene, Maurice and the narrator are about to engage in some filmmaking. At one point, Maurice decides he wants to enlist Judy, the narrator, as a kind of videographer, like a personal videographer who takes promotional video clips of him because he's going to go on a reunion tour with his band. So in this scene, they just picked up a camcorder that they're gonna use for these shots, and they're walking down the street somewhere in New York. On page 159. Or 158. Right, so they're walking Is there a tape inside? Is it charged? Maurice asks, stopping suddenly in the middle of the sidewalk. I looked at the camcorder. I'd been cradling it in my arms since we borrowed it. I pressed the power button. A green light came on. I think so, I said. Great, Maurice said. I'm gonna run in and get a coffee. He pointed at a store whose windows were covered in candy bar advertisements. You film, he continued. He took a step toward the store and turned around, his hair in his face. He was excited. He looked nervous too, like an actor who'd been called in for his big audition out of the blue. Can you get an angle from the entrance looking in? Or whatever you think works best, actually. You're the director here. Just get me buying a coffee. Just me being me. Maurice waved his hands in the air as he said the last part, then bolted into the shop. For 30 seconds, I stood unmoving, the camcorder still in my arms. I looked around at the cars, the people, and the buildings that knew nothing about Maurice and me, about where I'd come from, and what I'd been doing since meeting him 2 weeks before. For the first time, I felt something that I'd only ever felt in the company of my mother. An embarrassment so deep, shamed me to feel it, even in secret. I felt it in my chest and in my guts. I wanted to set the camera on the sidewalk and run. I looked down at it, at its mocking green light. I wish the battery would die suddenly. I felt burdened by this machine, the way it implied a whole job for me to execute, not on my terms. Okay, I called, lifting the camera to my face. Here I come. I was thinking I could read another scene with kind of like a anxious mother part, or I also, well, as part of so Maurice is a poet, he's a poetry professor, and a lot of people in like the 70s music scene, also writing poems. So I made a chapbook of his poems that I found and I gave out to some friends. I thought I could read some of his poems. So the thing is, I used poems that I'd written in the poetry workshops here in Sandra Alcocer's class and Ilya's class when he was still here. And but then I had to make them bad. Maurice is a buffoon figure, if you can already tell that from the excerpt. So, in line with how a lot of these poets sound, I just made the poems have more, cliches and like male genitalia references and solipsism in them. So I'm kind of glad Sandra's not here. I feel really bad. Yeah. So yeah, I'll read like two of Maurice's poems. Okay. So I never know how to pronounce this word. Redux. Redux. Okay. I didn't write this, so Maurice wrote this. So I pronounce the words. Okay, so this poem is called Cold God Redux. I've been told everything I wanted to hear. In the last 20 minutes, the departed have wished me well in all my small endeavors. Returning an item to the store, trying on a shirt. Thank you. They have shown unprecedented charity. My oldest friend forgave me for what I did. The man who lived on the corner did too. He looked so uniquely judgmental whenever he came out of his building and surveyed the street with his arms crossed under the dirty clouds. Yeah, that wasn't so bad actually. Just more swimming. Okay, this one's called post-oral, which is a pun on pastoral. This is the place I've been looking for so long. No atmospheric pressure. I'm alone. I roll around in underwear only, making daisy chains, smoking a cigarette. There are no women on corners. No one has said, this is so, or hey, Maurice, where are you headed? My cock is a daisy. I'm polite to the thin air that thinks nothing of me. I'm in the dust storm half the time. No one can see me. There's no one to see me. I've put on my new boots and moved in with the marigolds. Nay, malaise, my oh my, I say, snapping my fingers at the faint shape of your ghost. A soft dirt lines my resting spot. From where I sit, there's no view of home. Alright. I think there's a really short bad one. Okay, sure. I watch, it's called Alienation Peep Show. I watched your apartment from 15 feet away. Each time the curtain stirred, I thought I saw your hand curl and pick at the pattern. The curtain stirred the skin of my ticking cock. The collection is called Cold God. It's published in 1989. Wet Coaster Press out of Stockton, California. Yeah, I think that's it.
I mean, if you want to end on.
Reese's poems.
I know, yeah. I know, right. All right, let's give Marta a round of applause. I don't know, I feel like Sandra would have enjoyed those. Let's thank Marta again, that was. Big Shadow is for sale over there in the corner. Unfortunately, we don't have any of the wonderful Maurice's collection of poems, but maybe Marta can tell us how to get that, right? And then we can set it on fire or something. So be sure to check that out. I'm sure Marta would be happy to sign it for us. And then if you'd like, we are having a Q&A session just right across the hallway in room 408. So you are welcome to join us. Either way, thank you for being such a fabulous audience, and we hope to see you for our next event on March 13th. Is that right, Markle? Gloria Kuma Memorial Reading featuring Erica Hayasaki. I think that's correct. All right, and get home safely, y'all. Thanks again.
I was like, this is gonna be solid.